The bell above the door of Willow Street Cafe jingled, and for a moment every sound inside stopped. Sarah stepped in slowly, the cold air from outside still clinging to her worn-out coat. The scent of fresh coffee and cinnamon filled the place, the same smell that used to mean comfort, but now it mocked her, like a reminder of a life that no longer fit. The chatter faded into whispers. "That's her," someone murmured. "Pregnant, and she still has the nerve to show up here." Sarah kept her eyes fixed on the wooden floor, each step heavier than the last. She wasn't there to beg, just to collect her final paycheck, the last fragment of her dignity. Behind the counter stood Martha, the manager. She wiped the glass display slowly, as if she had been expecting this. It was the same woman who had fired her 2 weeks earlier, her voice sharp, her eyes cold, saying she couldn't afford the gossip. Now, Martha barely hid her discomfort. "Sarah," she said flatly, "you shouldn't be here." Sarah swallowed hard. "I just came for the check you owe me." The silence that followed felt unbearable. A man cleared his throat. Someone pretended to look at their phone. But Sarah could feel every eye in the room, the weight of the town's judgment pressing on her chest. Then the bell rang again. David Carter walked in. Pressed shirt, expensive watch, the same charming smile that once made her heart stop. But right behind him came Rebecca, his ex-wife, hair tied back, leather jacket, eyes that didn't flinch. The air grew thick. Martha froze mid-motion. The customers stared openly now. Sarah's body stiffened. The blood in her veins seemed to slow. David hesitated when he saw her. Rebecca didn't. She walked straight to the counter, stopping only a few feet away. "So, it's you," she said, her voice calm but cutting. "The woman who destroyed my family." Sarah opened her mouth, but no words came out. David stepped forward nervously. "Rebecca, not here, please." Too late. Rebecca pulled a crumpled paper from her purse and dropped it on the counter. "I found this in your office," she said. "An ultrasound. Congratulations, Sarah. Seems like you got what you wanted." The paper unfolded, a black and white blur, a tiny beating heart. The room spun. Sarah stared at the image as if it belonged to someone else. It wasn't the baby that hurt. It was the eyes of the people around her. Sharp, curious, cruel. "You don't understand," she whispered. Rebecca crossed her arms. "Oh, I understand perfectly. You thought you'd won, but you haven't heard the whole story." Silence. Only the sound of coffee dripping into the pot, slow and rhythmic. Sarah looked at David, searching for any sign of defense. He looked away. Martha cleared her throat. "Sarah, maybe you should leave." Sarah picked up the paper with trembling hands and walked out. The bell jingled behind her, and the murmurs grew louder. Outside, the cold air slapped her face. The streets of Clearwater reflected 1,000 eyes in their windows. She pressed the ultrasound to her chest and kept walking. In her mind, one thought repeated like a prayer: if destiny exists, it can't be this cruel. But she didn't know yet. Destiny never ends in humiliation. It only begins there. The effects of the rain had stopped hours ago, but the streets of Clearwater were still wet, shining under the dim glow of streetlights like veins of silver running through the night. Sarah walked slowly, holding the ultrasound against her chest, her breath visible in the cold. Every step echoed with the same question: how did it come to this? A car passed by, splashing water onto the sidewalk. She didn't flinch. The cold didn't bother her anymore, not after everything that had burned inside her over the past few weeks. At the end of the street stood a small auto shop, its flickering neon sign barely holding on. Hank's Auto Repair. The door was half open, and a warm light spilled onto the wet pavement. Inside, an older man with grey hair and oil-stained hands worked beneath a car. His name was Hank Miller, a man who'd seen too much of life to be easily surprised. Sarah hesitated at the door. She didn't know him, didn't even plan to come here, but something about the warmth of that light, the smell of oil and metal, felt like refuge. "Can I help you?" Hank's voice broke through the hum of the radio. She stepped in. I'm not sure," she said softly. Do you need someone to clean, maybe help around here? I can work nights. He slid out from under the car, squinting at her face under the yellow light. You know anything about engines? No, she admitted, but I learn fast. He looked at her for a long time, not the way people at the cafe had, not judging, not curious, just measuring the kind of pain that only someone who's lost something could recognize. Finally, he nodded toward a pile of rags. Start by cleaning that mess. If you do it right, I'll find you something harder tomorrow. Sarah blinked, surprised. You don't even know my name. Hank wiped his hands on a towel and said calmly, Don't need to. People who show up in the rain usually deserve a chance. Hours passed. The steady sound of rain outside mixed with the rhythmic tapping of tools, the low hum of the radio, and the metallic heartbeat of the garage. Sarah moved quietly, wiping the tables, sweeping corners, folding cloths, anything to keep her mind from replaying the morning. When she looked up, Hank was watching her from behind the hood of a truck. You worked before? He asked. At a cafe, she said. Didn't end well. He smirked. Cafe or cafe people? She smiled faintly for the first time in days. Both, he chuckled, returning to work. You don't have to tell me what happened. But you should know something, girl. Machines don't care who you are. They just care if you listen. Sarah tilted her head. If I listen? Yeah, he said, tapping the engine. Every problem starts with a sound. People talk too much. Engines? They just whisper what's wrong. Something about that line stayed with her. Engines whisper what's wrong. Maybe that's why she was there, to finally listen to something that didn't lie. By the time she finished cleaning, the rain had stopped completely. The air smelled of gasoline and wet asphalt. Hank locked the front door, tossed her an old coat that smelled of metal and soap, and said, Be here at 7 tomorrow. Don't be late. Sarah hesitated. You mean, I got the job? He shrugged. Let's call it a test drive. She smiled, small, hesitant, but real. As she walked back through the quiet streets, she realized it was the first time in weeks she'd smiled without forcing it. Maybe fate wasn't trying to destroy her. Maybe it was just pushing her somewhere she was meant to go. And somewhere, deep inside, she could almost hear the echo of Hank's voice. Engines don't care who you are. They just care if you listen. She looked up at the sky, whispered to herself, then maybe it's time I start listening too. The next morning, the sky over Clearwater was pale and quiet. The kind of quiet that always came before something new tried to begin. Sarah arrived early at Hank's Auto Repair, a cup of cheap coffee in one hand and her nerves in the other. Hank was already there, sleeves rolled up, humming along with the radio. He nodded when he saw her. Didn't think you'd actually show up, he said, grinning. I said I would, she replied. He pointed to a rusty pickup truck. Then let's see if you're the type who keeps her word. The first few hours went smoothly. Sarah swept floors, organized tools, handed Hank wrenches when he asked. But when the other mechanics arrived, two men in their 30s named Clint and Ray, the atmosphere shifted. They stopped at the door when they saw her, exchanging looks. Clint smirked. Didn't know we were hiring interns from beauty school. Ray chuckled. Guess Hank got tired of looking at our ugly faces. Hank didn't even look up. She's here to work. Don't start. But they kept at it. Every time Sarah passed, a joke followed. Quiet enough to sound casual, loud enough to sting. Careful with that wrench, sweetheart. It's heavier than your purse. You sure she's not just here to keep you company, Hank? Sarah tried to ignore them. She focused on the rhythm of the garage, the hum of the air compressor, the metallic clicks, the occasional hiss of steam. But she could feel their eyes on her, measuring, doubting. She tightened a bolt the wrong way, and the wrench slipped, cutting her hand. Blood welled up instantly. Clint laughed. Told you! Not cut out for this. Hank crossed the room in 2 steps and slammed the wrench on the table. That's enough, he barked. The garage fell silent. He turned to Sarah. You all right? She nodded, holding her palm with a rag. Good. Then go clean up and come back. We're not quitting over a scratch. Sarah met his eyes. There was no pity there, only steady calm, the kind that said, you belong here. Don't run. At lunch, Sarah sat alone behind the garage, eating a sandwich she'd made the night before. Her hands still smelled of oil, and she didn't hate it. It smelled like progress. Hank joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one without a word and sat on an overturned tire. "They're not bad guys," he said eventually. "Just small-town dumb. Give it time." Sarah took a sip, wincing at the bitterness. "I'm used to worse." "I don't doubt that," Hank said, looking at her bandaged hand. "But I'll tell you something, kid. People remember the ones who don't leave when it gets hard." She nodded quietly. "Guess I'll just keep showing up." He smiled. "That's how the best ones start." By the end of the day, Sarah had learned the names of half the tools on the wall and the rhythm of every engine in the shop. Her arms ached, her fingers were sore, and there was grease under every nail. But for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. As the sun set, Clint passed by her with a reluctant glance. "Didn't think you'd last the day," he muttered. Sarah wiped her hands and smiled faintly. "Guess you were wrong." Hank watched from the doorway, pride hidden beneath his gruffness. He nodded once. "See you tomorrow, Miller." And for the first time, hearing her last name didn't remind Sarah of shame. It reminded her of work, of noise and effort, and something quietly rebuilding itself. Outside, the neon sign buzzed against the twilight. The hum of the city mixed with the sound of engines still cooling, and somewhere deep inside, Sarah knew every cruel word she'd heard today would one day become proof that she'd earned her place. By the 3rd morning, Sarah already knew the smell of the shop better than her own skin. Oil, rust, burned rubber, and coffee so strong it could fix an engine by itself. She was learning to move within the rhythm of the garage, the clang of metal, the hiss of air, Hank's low hum as he worked. But that morning, something was off. A red pickup sat in the middle of the shop, hood open, steam rising like anger. Clint and Ray circled it, arguing. "Fuel pump's dead," Ray said. "Fuel line," Clint countered. "It's the injectors." "It's not." Hank stood back, arms crossed, watching his 2 best mechanics trip over each other. When he saw Sarah entering, wiping her hands on an old rag, he motioned her closer. "Morning, Miller," he said. "Come learn something." She hesitated. "Learn what?" He smirked. "How grown men argue about engines they don't understand." The men glared at him. Ray muttered, "Oh great, now we got the rookie here to fix it." "Why not?" Hank said. "Sometimes fresh eyes see what stubborn ones don't." And Sarah approached the truck slowly, listening to it like Hank had taught her. The smell was sharp, not oil, not rubber, gasoline. She leaned over, tapped one of the lines gently, then crouched to look underneath. Clint laughed. "Careful, sweetheart. That thing's been there longer than you've been alive." But she didn't answer. She grabbed a wrench, loosened the connector, and a stream of fuel sputtered out. "Fuel's not reaching the injectors," she murmured. She followed the line with her eyes until she saw it, a hairline crack in the metal coupling, almost invisible. She turned to Hank. "There," she said, pointing, "right before the bend." Hank walked over, leaned in and squinted. Then he smiled. "Well, I'll be damned." Clint blinked. That's impossible to see." "Not if you actually look," Hank replied. He turned to Sarah. "Get me a size 12 wrench." She handed it to him instantly. "Good," he said. "Now fix it." "What?" she asked, startled. "You found it. You fix it." The men exchanged glances, half amused, half curious. Sarah's hands trembled as she adjusted the line, tightened the coupling, and replaced the seal. Her movements were careful, precise, uncertain but determined. When she finished, Hank nodded to her. Moment of truth. He turned the key. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life. The deep, even rumble filled the garage, echoing like applause. Clint let out a low whistle. "Lucky guess." Hank shook his head. "No such thing as luck when you're paying attention." Sarah couldn't hide the smile spreading across her face. It wasn't pride, it was relief. For once, she had done something that no one could take away, no one could twist into shame. When the customer arrived later, Hank told him what happened. "Who fixed it?" the man asked. Hank pointed to Sarah. "She did." The customer blinked. "Her? Thought you'd say your son or something." Hank chuckled. "No sons here, just good hands and better instincts." The man nodded, impressed, and left a $50 tip on the counter. Hank handed it to Sarah. "Split it," she said. He pushed it back. "You earned it. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." And that evening, Sarah sat on the steps outside the shop, watching the sunset reflect off the puddles on the asphalt. Her hands were still stained with grease, her nails ruined, but she'd never felt cleaner. Inside, Hank turned off the lights, leaving only the glow from the office lamp. Before locking up, he paused and said quietly, "You've got something, Miller. Don't lose it chasing approval." She smiled faintly. "Approval from who?" He shrugged. "Anyone who thinks they're better just because they haven't fallen yet." As he walked away, Sarah looked at the darkening sky and whispered to herself, "Maybe I haven't fallen. Maybe I'm just learning how to land." The next few days at Hank's auto repair moved differently. The rhythm was the same. Clanging tools, humming engines, the faint static of the old radio. But the air had changed. Something quiet but undeniable lingered in it. Respect. Clint didn't say much anymore. Neither did Ray. When Sarah passed by, their jokes stopped halfway through their throats. It wasn't apology, not yet, but it was silence, and silence was more than she'd had in a long time. Hank noticed it too. He didn't make a big deal of her win with the red pickup, but every so often he'd glance at her, that half-smile hidden beneath his mustache, the kind that said, "I told you, you'd figure it out." But that morning, Sarah arrived earlier than usual. The sun was barely up, the air crisp with the smell of dew and metal. She unlocked the shop, brewed coffee, and started organizing the work orders before Hank even showed up. When he did, he froze at the door. "You trying to steal my job, Miller?" She smiled faintly, just trying to make things run smoother. He laughed, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Careful, you make things too efficient, and people start expecting miracles every day." Sarah shrugged. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing." He looked at her for a moment and said quietly, "The trick is to give miracles small enough that people mistake them for hard work." She didn't answer, but she understood. Later that morning, a young woman walked in with a broken-down sedan and tears in her eyes. "My car died again," she said, voice trembling. "I can't afford another tow." Hank glanced at the clock. The day was packed already. But before he could answer, Sarah stepped forward. "Let me take a look." The woman blinked. "You?" Sarah nodded, gently smiling. "Yeah, I've seen this model before. Might be the alternator." 10 minutes later, Sarah had her head under the hood. A few cables, a cracked connector, a missing screw. She tightened, replaced, adjusted, then, with a flick of her wrist, turned the key. The engine started instantly. The woman gasped, relief washing over her face. "You fixed it? That fast?" Sarah wiped her hands. "Just needed someone to pay attention." The woman hugged her before leaving, something that never happened in that garage. Hank watched from the office window, pretending not to smile. At lunch, Clint and Ray sat in silence while Sarah cleaned up the workbench. Finally, Clint spoke, scratching his neck. "Hey, that was good work today." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Thanks." He nodded awkwardly. "Didn't mean to give you a hard time before. Guess we were just surprised." By what? That you actually know what you're doing." Sarah chuckled. "So was I." Even Ray cracked a grin. "Guess we'll keep you around." "Guess you will," she said. When closing time came, Sarah stayed behind to sweep. Hank was finishing paperwork when he said, "You're different, you know that?" She looked up. "Different how?" He leaned back in his chair. "Most people fix engines 'cause it's a job. You fix them like you're trying to fix something else too." Sarah froze for a second. "I guess I am." He nodded, satisfied. "Then don't stop. The day you fix what's inside, you'll be unstoppable." The words hit deeper than he realized. She didn't respond, just smiled faintly and kept sweeping. Outside, the neon sign buzzed again, casting its red light on the damp street. A group of teenagers passed by laughing, one of them calling out, "Hey, that's the girl who works at Hank's." For the first time, the words didn't sound like gossip. They sounded like belonging. Sarah looked up at the flickering sign and whispered, "Maybe the world doesn't have to believe in me all at once. Maybe it starts with one small place that does." And behind her, Hank switched off the radio, saying softly, "See you tomorrow, Miller." She smiled to herself. "Yeah, you will." It was a Wednesday afternoon when everything shifted. The air in Clearwater felt heavy, charged, like the town itself was holding its breath. A storm was coming, though no one could see it yet. Sarah was in the shop, elbow deep in the engine of an old Chevy, when the door swung open and Rebecca Carter walked in. Yes, that Rebecca, the ex-wife, the one who had humiliated her at the cafe. The entire garage froze. Even the radio seemed to stop mid-song. Hank looked up from his paperwork, squinting as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Rebecca stood there, pale and nervous, clutching her phone like a weapon she didn't know how to use. Her left arm was wrapped in a bandage, and a faint bruise shadowed her cheek. "Sarah," she said, voice trembling, I didn't know where else to go." Sarah froze. For a second she thought it was some cruel joke and a trick, a setup. But then she saw the fear in Rebecca's eyes, the kind that doesn't fake well. "What happened?" Hank asked. Rebecca hesitated, then looked straight at Sarah. "It's David," she said quietly. "He's been following me, calling at night, showing up outside my apartment." The name hit like a punch to the stomach. David, the man who had broken both their lives in different ways. Sarah's first instinct was anger. You made your bed. Live in it. But then she saw Rebecca's hands shaking, and suddenly the anger didn't fit anymore. "Ski." Hank came around the counter, calm but serious. "You need to call the sheriff," he said. "I did," Rebecca replied. "They said without proof there's nothing they can do." Sarah looked down at her hands, black with grease and trembling slightly. She didn't owe Rebecca anything, but she remembered what Hank had told her once. The world doesn't get better when you pay pain with pain. She took a deep breath. "You can stay here," she said finally. Rebecca blinked. "What?" "Until you figure out what to do. It's not much, but it's safe." Rebecca hesitated, then nodded, almost in disbelief. "You'd do that? After everything?" Sarah wiped her hands on a rag. "We both fell for the same lie. That makes us teammates, not enemies." That night, the storm broke. Thunder rolled over Clearwater like a low growl, and rain slammed against the metal roof of the shop. Hank had gone home early, leaving Sarah and Rebecca alone inside the dim, humming garage. Rebecca sat at the small table, her phone lighting up with missed calls, all from the same number. She turned it face down, eyes filled with dread. Sarah poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from her. "He always had that look, didn't he?" Rebecca whispered. "Like he could talk his way out of anything." Sarah nodded slowly. "Yeah, and we let him." I thought I was smarter than you," Rebecca said bitterly. "Turns out we were both just lonely." Sarah looked at her, the reflection of the overhead light glinting in her eyes. "Don't mistake loneliness for weakness," she said. "It just means you still have room for hope." Rebecca let out a shaky laugh. "You sound like Hank." "I've been listening." Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating the 2 women, once enemies, now silent allies, surrounded by engines and shadows. Boom! The rain didn't stop for hours. By midnight, the power flickered and went out. The shop was swallowed in darkness, except for a faint glow from Hank's emergency lantern. Sarah stood by the window, watching the storm rage. Rebecca dozed off at the table, exhaustion finally winning. For a moment, Sarah thought about her mother, about how she'd survived betrayal and whispers and still taught her daughter to believe in decency. That memory became a quiet vow. She turned to Rebecca, pulled a blanket over her shoulders, and whispered, "You're safe now. I'll make sure of it." And for the first time since that humiliating day at the cafe, Sarah didn't feel like a victim. She felt like someone with power, not the kind that controls, but the kind that protects. Outside, thunder faded into silence, and inside, something else began to take its place, a fragile, unspoken peace. The storm had passed, but the town of Clearwater woke to chaos. Branches covered the streets, power lines hung low, and the morning sky was a bruised grey. The air smelled like wet asphalt and gasoline. Sarah arrived early at the shop, the old blue jacket pulled tight against the wind. Hank's truck was already parked out front, but inside he wasn't working. He was standing still, staring at a sheet of paper on the desk. "What is it?" Sarah asked, hanging her coat. He looked up slowly. "Emergency call from the city. The supply truck that brings oxygen to the hospital broke down on Route 12. If it doesn't get there by noon—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Sarah's stomach tightened. "Can't the city mechanics handle it?" "They already tried," Hank said. "Said the engine's dead. But it's a diesel from the 90s, the kind only stubborn hands can bring back." He looked at her then, eyes serious. "You think you're up for it, Miller?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Where's the truck?" Route 12 was half flooded, the road glistening with puddles that mirrored the heavy clouds above. The oxygen truck sat on the shoulder, tilted slightly to one side, its hood open like a wounded animal. Steam hissed from the radiator. Sarah jumped out of Hank's pickup, Jake following close behind with a toolbox. Rebecca, who had insisted on coming, watched anxiously from the passenger seat. "Clock's ticking," Hank muttered, checking his watch. 2 hours. Sarah popped the hood and took a long, steady breath. Her eyes scanned the maze of metal and wires, her ears tuned to the faint rhythm beneath the chaos. Something Hank once said came back to her. "Engines don't talk, they confess." "Fuel lines dry," she murmured. "Starters shot. Alternators probably gone too." "Meaning?" Jake asked. "Meaning it's not impossible, just ugly." She rolled up her sleeves. "Let's get to work." Minutes turned into an hour. Mud splashed, tools clattered, hands bled. Sarah moved fast but deliberate, listening, adjusting, cursing under her breath when bolts refused to budge. Hank and Jake followed her lead without question. Every few minutes, Rebecca would call updates from the truck radio. "The hospital says they have an hour's supply left, maybe less." Sarah didn't look up. Her heartbeat matched the rhythm of her wrench. Her palms burned, her breath came short, but she refused to stop. She thought of her mother, working double shifts just to keep the lights on, of every time someone had told her she'd never be more than a mistake, and of the baby growing inside her now, depending on her for a chance at something better. She tightened the last coupling, slammed the hood shut and shouted, "Try it!" Hank turned the key. Nothing. Just a low click. Jake's voice cracked. "Battery's dead." Sarah's hands trembled. 1 second of doubt, 1 heartbeat of despair. Then, quietly, she said, "Give me your truck battery." "What?" Hank asked. "You heard me." Within minutes, they'd swapped it in. Sarah stood in the rain again, soaked, exhausted, her hands black with grease. "Try it again," she said softly. This time, the engine coughed once, twice, then came alive with a deep, steady roar. Hank let out a shout that startled even the crows from the trees. Jake whooped, Rebecca covered her mouth, and Sarah, she just stood there, smiling through the tears mixing with rain. The truck driver leaned out the window. "You just saved a lot of people, lady." Sarah exhaled slowly, staring at the trail of exhaust smoke curling into the grey sky. For a moment, everything, the mud, the noise, the pain, disappeared. There was only peace. "Akio." On the way back, Hank looked at her with quiet pride. "You did it," he said. Sarah wiped her face with her sleeve. "No, we did," he smiled. "Nah, Miller. You led. Don't pretend otherwise." Rebecca leaned forward from the back seat. "You really think she'll keep working for you after this?" she teased. Hank grinned. "At this point, I'll be lucky if she doesn't buy the place." They all laughed. For the first time in months, the sound wasn't strained. It was light, human, like something had finally healed in the air around them. As they drove back into town, Sarah looked out the window. Clearwater was quiet again, soaked, messy, alive. And somewhere deep inside, she realized this wasn't just a repair, it was a redemption. The oxygen truck reached the hospital just in time. By evening, the storm had settled and the town of Clearwater was breathing again. But inside Sarah, another kind of storm was still raging. She stayed late at the shop that night alone. The others had gone home, Hank to rest, Jake to check on his father, Rebecca to her apartment. The place was quiet now, the kind of quiet that amplifies every thought you've tried to avoid. Sarah sat at the workbench, staring at the ultrasound folded in her pocket. Her fingers traced the edges of the paper until they were smudged with grease. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "You're safe now, I promise." That's when the door creaked open. Rebecca stood there, pale and hesitant. "I know it's late," she said softly, "but I found something. Something you need to see." Sarah looked up, cautious. "What is it?" Rebecca walked in, holding an old envelope, yellowed, brittle at the edges. "I was cleaning David's office. I wasn't looking for trouble, but I found this." She placed the envelope on the table. Written on it in faded blue ink was a name Sarah hadn't seen in years, Evelyn Miller. Her heart stopped. "That's my mother," Sarah whispered. Rebecca nodded. "I thought it might be. You should read it." Sarah hesitated, her hands trembling as she unfolded the letter inside. The paper smelled like time and regret. She began to read. "Evelyn, I'm not the man you think I am. There are things in my past I can't outrun. I can't take responsibility for this child. If anyone finds out what happened in Nashville, I'll lose everything. One day, maybe she'll understand. I left not because I didn't care, but because I was afraid." Signed at the bottom, David Carter. Sarah dropped the letter like it burned her. For a moment, the world tilted. Everything in the room blurred except for that name. David, her father. Rebecca's voice trembled. "I didn't believe it either, but the dates match. The handwriting. Everything." Sarah stepped back, shaking her head. No, that can't be right." "It is," Rebecca whispered. "He left you and your mother. And when you grew up, he found you again, without even realizing who you were." Sarah pressed her hands to her face, breathing hard. The shop felt smaller, the air heavier. The truth was a punch to the chest. The man she had loved, the man who destroyed her life, had been the same man who had abandoned her before she even took her first breath. She laughed, but it wasn't joy. It was disbelief. "The universe really does have a sick sense of humor," she said. Rebecca stepped closer. "I didn't show you this to hurt you. I needed you to know before he ran again. He's leaving town tomorrow night, selling everything, disappearing." Sarah's hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from fury. Her voice was low, trembling but firm. "He ran from my mother. He ran from me. And now he'll run again, unless someone stops him." Rebecca swallowed hard. "So what will you do?" Sarah looked up, eyes burning with a mix of pain and clarity. "What no one did for me or my mother," she said. "I'll tell the truth." She walked to the old photo of Hank on the wall, the one with his usual half-smile. He'd told her once, "The truth doesn't destroy people, Sarah. It reveals who they already are." And now she understood. Her whole life had been built on lies, whispered in the dark, disguised as protection. But she wasn't that scared little girl anymore. She was a woman with grease-stained hands and a heartbeat that refused to quit. She looked at Rebecca. "He won't get away this time." Rebecca nodded, silent but steady. Outside, thunder rumbled far in the distance, not from a storm, but like the echo of fate coming full circle. Sarah picked up the letter again, folded it carefully, and slid it into her jacket pocket. Then she said softly, more to herself than to anyone else, "He took everything from 2 women. Now 2 women will take his power back." The sound of the rain started again, not furious, not violent, just steady, like cleansing. And under that sound, something inside Sarah finally broke open, not in pain, but in clarity. The next morning, Clearwater was quiet again, that eerie calm that always follows the breaking of a truth too heavy to hold. Sarah hadn't slept. The letter from David lay open on her kitchen table, next to a cup of untouched coffee and a heart that refused to slow down. She read the words again, even though they no longer made sense. I left, not because I didn't care, but because I was afraid. Afraid of what? Of her, of himself, of the truth. It didn't matter anymore. For the first time, Sarah knew exactly what she had to do. She got dressed, tied her hair back, and drove to the hospital. Buzz, Hank, was sitting by the window, an IV hooked to his arm, a tired but proud smile on his face. Jake was asleep in the corner chair. The air smelled of disinfectant and coffee, the kind that never cools down. When he saw her, Hank grinned weakly. "Kid, you look like you wrestled a thunderstorm and lost." Sarah smiled faintly. "Close enough." She sat down beside him. "Hank, I found out something. Something I wish I hadn't." He didn't interrupt. He just listened, the way he always did. She told him everything, the letter, the truth about David, the connection to her mother. By the end, her voice was shaking. Hank exhaled slowly, his eyes soft but steady. "Well, that's a hell of a thing." Sarah laughed bitterly. "That's one way to put it." "Doesn't change who you are, though," he said. "It just explains why you fight so hard." She looked down. "I don't know what to do. He's leaving town tonight, probably for good." Hank's voice turned quiet. "Then don't let him." Sarah frowned. "What?" "Don't let him run again. You don't have to scream or fight or break anything. Just stand where he can see you, and don't look away." She nodded slowly, his words sinking in. "I can't do it alone." Hank smiled. "Then don't. You've got people now." Outside the hospital, Sarah found Jake waiting by her truck. He was still young, but his eyes had the weight of someone who'd seen the world fall apart once already. "My dad said you'd come," he said. "Did he tell you what happened?" He nodded. "Enough." She hesitated. "You shouldn't get involved." He shrugged. "Too late for that. He told me once the world only changes when someone decides not to walk away. So, here I am." Sarah smiled faintly. "You sound like him." "Yeah. Guess that's not such a bad thing." He handed her an envelope. "He wrote you this, told me to give it to you after you left." Inside was a single line, written in Hank's messy handwriting. "Be the miracle someone's waiting for." Sarah folded the paper, eyes burning. "Then I guess it's time." Back at the garage, Rebecca was waiting. She looked different now, still bruised, still tired, but standing taller. "David's at the office," she said. "Packing. He has tickets to Miami. He'll be gone by morning." Sarah nodded. "Then tonight's the night." Rebecca hesitated. "You really want to face him?" "No," Sarah said honestly. "But I need to." Rebecca studied her for a moment. "Then you're not doing it alone." Sarah frowned. "Rebecca, I'm serious," she interrupted. "He fooled me too, lied to me, used me. I'm done hiding." For a long moment they just looked at each other, two women who'd once been enemies, now joined by something stronger than forgiveness. Shared truth. Finally, Sarah extended her hand. Rebecca took it. As the sun set over Clearwater, they stood outside the shop, the air heavy with silence. Jake was tightening bolts on the tow truck they'd taken to town. Hank's words echoed in Sarah's head. "Don't let him run again." She turned to Rebecca. "Are you ready?" Rebecca nodded. "More than I thought I'd ever be." Sarah looked up at the fading sky. Somewhere behind the clouds, a thin ray of light broke through. And for the first time, it didn't feel like fate was mocking her. It felt like it was watching, waiting. She got into the truck, her hand on the ignition. The engine came to life with a steady, confident growl. "Let's go end this," she said. Rebecca smiled, the corner of her lip trembling. "Let's." The truck rolled out of the garage and into the darkening streets of Clearwater, headlights slicing through the night. Somewhere ahead, truth was waiting. And this time, Sarah wasn't afraid to face it. But the night in Clearwater was unusually still, the kind of stillness that comes right before a truth breaks open. The office building downtown stood in silence, its windows glowing faintly against the dark. Inside, boxes were stacked near the door, papers scattered across the floor. David Carter was packing fast. Suit pressed, watch gleaming, the same calm face that once charmed everyone he met, the same face that now looked almost human under fluorescent light. He checked his phone again. Flight to Miami, 6 a.m. Everything was set. Everything except peace. He heard the elevator doors open, 2 sets of footsteps. He froze. When he turned, he saw Sarah. Behind her stood Rebecca. For a moment, time didn't move. "Going somewhere?" Sarah asked quietly. David blinked, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sarah, this isn't what you think." She stepped closer. "No? Then tell me what it is. Tell me how you left my mother with nothing. Tell me how you disappeared before I was even born. And tell me how you came back into my life pretending you didn't know who I was." His jaw tightened. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," she said, voice trembling but steady. "You ran. Every time the truth got too close, you ran. From her. From me. From yourself." Rebecca crossed her arms. "She's not the first, David, and we both know she wouldn't have been the last." He turned toward her, voice sharp. "You have no right." Rebecca's voice cut through his like a blade. "I have every right. You lied to me, to her, to everyone. You don't get to leave this town pretending you're still the victim." For the first time, David looked cornered. The charm cracked. "What do you want from me?" he snapped. "Money, apologies, closure." Sarah shook her head slowly. "I don't want anything from you. I just want the truth to exist. Out loud, for once." He laughed bitterly. "You think anyone will believe you?" Rebecca reached into her purse and pulled out a small flash drive. "They don't have to believe us. They just have to watch this." David's face went pale. "What is that?" "Recordings," she said calmly. "Your calls, your contracts, your little confessions." He lunged forward, but Sarah stepped between them. "Don't," she said firmly. The room fell silent except for the hum of the overhead lights. Sarah's heart was pounding, but her eyes didn't waver. "You spent your whole life running from consequences," she said. "Tonight, you meet them." He looked at her, really looked, and something inside him seemed to collapse. "Evelyn's gone," he whispered. "You can't bring her back." "No," Sarah said softly, "but I can make sure her story doesn't repeat." He took a shaky breath. "You think exposing me will fix you, will make you whole?" Sarah's voice broke slightly, but her words didn't. "It's not about fixing. It's about freeing." Outside, sirens began to echo faintly in the distance. Rebecca had already called the sheriff. David turned toward the window, the red and blue lights reflecting across his face. His arrogance was gone now, replaced by something smaller, sadder. He looked back at Sarah. "You're really my daughter." She nodded once. "I was." He swallowed hard, his voice a whisper. "I didn't know. You didn't want to." For a long moment no one spoke. Then quietly David said, "I'm sorry." Sarah looked at him, not as the man who hurt her, but as the man who had been too afraid to love. And for the first time she felt no hatred at all, only release. "I forgive you," she said. "But forgiveness isn't freedom. You still have to face what you've done." The door burst open. 2 officers stepped in, their flashlights cutting through the dim. "David Carter," one said. "You're under arrest." David didn't resist. As they led him away, he glanced back one last time, not with anger, but something that almost looked like peace. Rebecca stood beside Sarah, silent. When the elevator doors closed, she whispered, "It's over." Sarah shook her head softly. "No, it's just beginning." But later that night, the streets of Clearwater were wet again, but the air felt lighter. Sarah and Rebecca sat on the steps outside the garage, coffee mugs in hand. Neither said much. They didn't need to. Finally, Rebecca spoke. "He can't hurt anyone anymore." "No," Sarah said, "but he already changed us. Now it's our turn to decide what that means." Rebecca looked at her, eyes soft. "What does it mean for you?" Sarah glanced toward the horizon. "It means I finally know who I am. Not someone's mistake, not someone's secret, just Me. The neon sign above them flickered to life, glowing against the rain. Hank's words echoed in her mind. Engines don't care who you are. They just care if you listen. She smiled faintly, and somewhere deep inside, the noise of all her pain grew quiet, replaced by something steady, something alive. Not an ending, a beginning. By sunrise, Clearwater looked peaceful again, like nothing had happened. The rain had washed the streets clean, the air smelled of wet cedar and gasoline, and the world, indifferent as ever, simply moved on. But Sarah didn't. She hadn't slept. After the arrest, she had driven until her hands stopped shaking, until the highway disappeared into fog, and she could no longer tell if she was escaping or returning. Eventually, she pulled over by the old bridge that crossed the Clearwater River, the place where she used to come as a teenager whenever the world got too loud. Now, sitting on the hood of her truck, she watched the current move, slow, steady, uncaring. The kind of movement that doesn't fight anything, just carries it away. Her phone buzzed. Rebecca. He's gone. They transferred him to county jail. Thank you. Sarah didn't reply. She just stared at the message until the words blurred. She had imagined this moment for years, confronting him, saying everything she'd held inside, finally ending the cycle. But now that it had happened, she felt hollow, like she'd burned down a house that once hurt her, and all that was left was smoke. By late morning, she returned to the shop. The place was quiet, sunlight filtering through dusty windows, catching the floating motes like ghosts of old workdays. Hank's empty chair sat by the counter. His jacket still hung on the back of it. Sarah touched the fabric gently, then sat down, her body heavy. The adrenaline was gone now, replaced by a deep, aching fatigue that went beyond muscles. It lived in the bones. Jake walked in a few minutes later, carrying 2 coffees. He placed one in front of her without a word. "You okay?" he asked softly. She managed a tired smile. "I will be." He sat across from her, watching. "Dad said when you face the thing that broke you, it doesn't disappear. It just stops chasing you." Sarah looked up, eyes wet. "That sounds like him." "He wanted to come by today," Jake said, "but the doctors are keeping him one more night. He said he's proud of you." The words hit harder than she expected. She looked away quickly, but her voice cracked anyway. "He's the only person who ever saw me before I saw myself." Jake smiled faintly. "That's what he does." They sat there for a while in silence, 2 people bound not by blood, but by the same man's quiet belief that broken things could still work. Later that afternoon, Sarah walked out to the back lot, where the old engines were kept. Rows of rusted cars sat under the sun, forgotten but not lifeless. She picked up a wrench, turned it in her hand, feeling the familiar weight. Everything around her, the oil stains, the smell of iron, the hum of distant traffic, felt different now, not as noise, but as rhythm. She leaned over an old Chevy, tightened a bolt and whispered to herself, "Engines don't need forgiveness. People do." Her hands steadied. Her breath evened out. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt something she hadn't dared to name. Peace. That night, the shop lights stayed on late. Rebecca stopped by with dinner, and they sat on the floor, eating out of takeout boxes. No big speeches, no tears, just quiet, human company. At one point, Rebecca looked at her and said, "You saved me, you know." Sarah shook her head. "No. You saved yourself. I just stood next to you while you did it." Rebecca smiled, eyes glistening. "Then maybe that's what saving really is." They clinked their coffee cups like a small, silent toast. When Sarah finally locked up and stepped outside, the sky was clear. No clouds, no thunder, just stars. She stood there for a long moment, breathing in the cool air. She still didn't know what would happen next. The baby, the shop, her life. But for once, uncertainty didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a beginning. She looked up, whispering into the night, "Mom, I did it. I told the truth." And though no voice answered, a faint wind passed through the trees, gentle and warm, like approval. Sarah smiled, wiped a tear from her cheek, and started walking home. Each step steady, each breath lighter. The past hadn't vanished. It had simply stopped owning her. The morning light crept across Clearwater, painting the rooftops gold. The air smelled of wet soil and coffee, that mix of endings and beginnings only small towns seem to understand. Sarah opened the garage early, the key turning in the lock with a soft click. Inside, everything looked the same tools, the same stains, the same smell of gasoline, but she wasn't the same anymore. There was a stillness inside her now, not emptiness, but clarity. She flipped the sign to open, turned on the radio, and let the familiar hum fill the space. For the first time in years, it didn't sound like noise, it sounded like home. And the customers started coming in again, slowly at first, then more each week. Word had spread, not about the scandal, about the woman who fixed a city truck in the middle of a storm and saved a hospital full of people. They didn't talk about her past anymore. They talked about her skill, her calm, her way of listening to machines like they had stories worth hearing. Hank came back to work part-time, his walk a little slower, his jokes even drier. But the twinkle in his eyes when he saw Sarah behind the counter, that was pride. Jake handled the heavier work now, moving with the kind of confidence only mentorship gives. And Rebecca, she visited often, still healing, still learning how to live without fear. They didn't call each other friends. It was something quieter, like family rebuilt from wreckage. One afternoon, Sarah stepped out behind the garage, sitting on the same old bench she'd once used to hide her tears. The air was warm, the sun soft against her skin. In her hands, she held the ultrasound photo again, creased, worn, almost translucent. She smiled. "Hey, kid," she whispered. "You're coming into a world that's messy and loud, but it's real, and I'm ready for it." For the first time, those words didn't scare her. They felt like truth. She had spent years trying to escape her past. Now she could finally see that it wasn't a curse. It was a map. Every betrayal, every mistake, every heartbreak had been pointing her here, to this small garage, this town, this moment. A few days later, the mayor of Clearwater showed up. He shook her hand and handed her a framed certificate for exceptional service and courage under pressure. Sarah laughed, a little embarrassed. "Never thought I'd get a plaque for fixing a truck," the mayor smiled. "You didn't just fix a truck, you fixed a town's faith in people." She didn't have an answer for that, just a smile that said thank you without words. When he left, Hank leaned over the counter, teasing, "Guess I hired right." Sarah smirked. "Guess you did." As weeks passed, life found its rhythm again. Engines came and went. Bills got paid. The world kept spinning. But something inside Sarah had shifted forever. Every time she tightened a bolt, she thought of her mother's hands. Every time she wiped the grease from her palms, she thought of Hank's quiet faith. And every time she heard a customer thank her, she thought of the little life growing inside her, the one that would never have to wonder where it came from. But that night, Sarah closed the shop late. The streets were empty, the stars clear. She stood under the flickering neon sign and whispered the word Hank had taught her once, Destiny. It didn't sound heavy anymore. It sounded gentle, like a promise kept. She looked up at the sky, smiled softly and said, "I guess this is what healing looks like." Then she turned off the lights and walked home, her shadow stretching long behind her. Not as something chasing her, but as proof she still carried light. A few months later, Clearwater woke up to something unusual. Hope. The town that once whispered behind people's backs now gathered together in the square to celebrate its heroes. Not the ones from stories or TV, the real ones, the kind that bleed quietly and keep working anyway. Sarah stood near the back of the crowd, uncomfortable in the dress Rebecca had insisted she wear. Hank stood beside her, leaning on his cane, trying not to smile too much. Jake was filming everything on his phone. The mayor was already on stage, microphone in hand. Today, he said. "We honor ordinary people who did extraordinary things." He called a few names: a firefighter, a teacher, a nurse, then paused, looking over the crowd. And finally, someone who reminded this town that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the sound of an engine starting in the rain. The crowd murmured, heads turning. "Sarah Miller," the mayor said. "Would you please come up here?" Hank nudged her gently. "Go on, kid, don't make me drag you." She laughed nervously and walked toward the stage. The crowd parted as she passed, not out of gossip or curiosity this time, but out of respect. When she stepped under the lights, she could barely see past the glare, but she could hear them, clapping, cheering, whistling. It was overwhelming. It was healing. The mayor handed her the microphone. She hesitated for a moment, then said quietly, "I don't know how to make speeches." Laughter rippled through the crowd. She smiled. "I just fix things. Engines, machines, sometimes people when I'm lucky." Her voice grew steadier. "This town gave me a second chance when it didn't have to. I'm not standing here because I'm strong. I'm standing here because people believed I could be." She glanced at Hank. "At least one person did." The old mechanic chuckled, pretending to hide his face. Sarah continued, her tone soft but clear. "I used to think destiny was something that happened to us, but maybe it's just the sum of every time we decide not to give up. Every time we choose kindness instead of pride. Every time we tell the truth, even when it hurts." The square was silent now, the kind of silence that listens. Sarah looked out at them, her eyes wet. "If you ever think your life is too broken to start over, look at me. I'm proof that wreckage can still run, if you care enough to rebuild it." Applause rose, soft at first, then growing louder until the entire square was standing. Hank wiped his eyes. Rebecca clapped until her hands hurt. Jake shouted, "That's my boss!" For a moment the world felt weightless. Not perfect, not fixed, but alive. Ndadyikum. After the ceremony, people surrounded her. Strangers thanking her, kids asking for photos, old men telling her stories about their first cars. Sarah laughed through it all, awkward but happy. She'd never been anyone's hero before. Later, when the sun began to set, she found a quiet corner by the fountain. The reflection in the water caught her by surprise. Same face, different woman. Rebecca joined her, holding 2 lemonades. "You were amazing up there." Sarah smiled. "I was terrified." "Good," Rebecca said. "Means it mattered." They sat together, watching kids play near the fountain, their laughter echoing through the square. "You ever think," Rebecca said, "that maybe none of this was an accident?" Sarah tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe we were meant to break, so we could build something better after." Sarah thought about that, then nodded. "Yeah, maybe that's what destiny really is." The fountain lights turned on, shimmering against the dusk. The town buzzed with life again, not haunted by what it used to be, but proud of what it had become, and at the center of it all, a mechanic with oil-stained hands and a heart that finally knew peace. That night, as Sarah drove home, the radio played softly. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, steady and sure. When she passed the bridge, she slowed down, rolled down the window and whispered, "Thank you, Mom. I made it." Somewhere in the distance, a train horn sounded, long, low, and almost melodic, a sound of moving forward. Sarah smiled and kept driving, headlights stretching into the open road ahead. For the first time, the horizon didn't look far. It looked like a promise. Time passed gently in clear water. Seasons turned without hurry, and the town slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. But something fundamental had changed. People were kinder. Neighbors stopped to help one another again, and somehow, in the center of it all, there was always a trace of Sarah Miller. The story of the woman who fixed the oxygen truck had spread beyond town limits. A journalist from Nashville Tribune came by once to write an article. She'd expected a hero with big speeches and bold words. Instead, she found Sarah, in oil-stained overalls, hair tied back, humming while she worked. When the article was published, the headline read, The Woman Who Listened to Engines and Heard the Human Heart. Hank laughed when he read it. Guess they ran out of metaphors. Sarah smiled. Guess they didn't need any. And the shop grew busier than ever. People drove from nearby towns just to have her look at their cars. But they didn't come only for repairs. They came to talk, to sit, to breathe for a while in a place that somehow made the noise of the world a little quieter. Sarah never rushed anyone. She'd listen to their stories, their losses, their worries, while her hands worked quietly under the hood. More than once, someone would leave saying, "I don't know how, but I feel better already." Hank used to tease her. "You're running a therapy shop, not a garage?" Sarah would smile. Maybe both. As months passed, she turned the back of the shop into a small training corner, just a bench, a chalkboard, a few old engines. She called it Miller's Workshop. Kids from the high school started showing up after classes. Most didn't know the first thing about tools, but they wanted to learn. And she wanted to teach. She didn't just teach mechanics, she taught patience, focus, self-respect. When one of the girls struggled with a carburetor, Sarah would say, "Don't fight it, listen to it. Everything broken tells you how to fix it. You just have to stay long enough to hear." Those words stuck. The kind of sentence that outlives the moment, it said. One afternoon, Rebecca stopped by with a baby blanket she had knitted herself. Soft grey, simple, perfect. "Figured you'll be needing this soon," she said with a smile. Sarah took it, fingers tracing the neat stitches. "Thank you. I didn't even know you could knit." "I didn't," Rebecca said, "but you made me want to learn something new. Guess that's your effect on people." They both laughed, the kind of laugh that feels like release. In that moment, Sarah realized something quietly profound. Her life wasn't just a collection of pain overcome. It was a chain reaction of courage passed forward. One small act of kindness becoming another, and another, like gears turning in perfect rhythm. When Hank passed away a year later, the whole town showed up for the memorial. The shop closed for the day, flowers covered the counter, and a photo of him, smiling with his usual half grin, stood by the window. Sarah didn't speak much that day. She didn't have to. Everyone knew what he had meant to her, and what she had meant to him. That night, she stayed late at the shop, alone. The moonlight hit the old toolbox Hank had left her. Inside, a note written in his shaky handwriting read, "You built something bigger than engines, kid. You built people. Keep doing that." She folded the note carefully, placed it back, and whispered, "I will." But the next morning, she painted a small sign above the garage door. In clean white letters, it read, "Destinies rebuilt here." People started noticing it. Some smiled when they passed by, some just nodded, quietly understanding what it meant. Because in Clearwater, destiny had come to mean something new. Not fate written by someone else, but the courage to start again when no one believes you can. And that, more than any award or headline, was the legacy Sarah Miller left behind. 10 years later, the town of Clearwater had grown, but its heart hadn't changed. The same main street, the same fountain where children played, the same garage at the corner of Elm and Jefferson. Only now, the sign above the door had been freshly repainted. "Destinies rebuilt here." Inside, the familiar scent of oil and metal mixed with something new, chalk dust, coffee, and laughter. The sound of wrenches clinking blended with the voices of teenagers learning how to rebuild carburetors and confidence at the same time. Sarah stood near the workbench, her hair streaked with silver now, her hands still steady. She wore the same faded jacket Hank once teased her about. A little boy, 10, maybe 11, ran up to her holding a spark plug. "Mum, is this the right one?" he asked. She knelt beside him, smiling. "Almost. You picked a 14mm. You need the 16. He grinned. "Told you I was close." "You're closer every day," she said, tapping his nose lightly. He laughed and ran back to the work table. Sarah watched him go, the way his hair caught the light, the way his curiosity filled the room, and her chest tightened with something soft and sacred. He was growing up surrounded by the sound of repair, the rhythm of fixing what others had given up on, just like she had. BT, yes, Rebecca still lived nearby, helping manage the books for the shop. Sometimes they'd sit outside after closing, sipping lemonade and watching the sun fade behind the hills. They didn't talk much about the past anymore. They didn't need to. It was there, in every bolt tightened, every student taught, every stranger who found comfort in that little garage. The past had become part of the foundation, steady, unmovable, but no longer heavy. Jake had opened a shop of his own in a neighboring town. He called it Hank's Motors, in memory of the man who taught them all that machines and people were worth saving. He still called Sarah every Sunday, sometimes for advice, sometimes just to say he missed her coffee. Life had stretched out like the open road, not perfect, not smooth, but honest. The key dispute one evening, after the last student had gone home and the garage lights were dim, Sarah sat alone at the workbench. The old radio was still there, now scratched and dented but playing faintly, a song from another lifetime. She opened Hank's toolbox, the one he'd left her, and ran her fingers over the note inside. "You built people. Keep doing that." She smiled softly. "Still am, old man," she whispered. Outside, the night was calm. The air hummed with cicadas. A soft breeze carried the scent of rain from far away. Not a storm, just the promise of one. Sarah looked at her reflection in the garage window. Older, gentler, free. She didn't see the woman who had once been broken. She saw the one who had chosen to rebuild. She turned off the radio, locked the door, and stepped outside. The streetlights cast long, golden shadows across the pavement. Above her, the stars looked the same as they always had, distant but constant. Her son called from the doorway, "Mom, are you coming?" She turned, smiling. "Yeah, just a second." She looked up one last time and whispered, "Mom, Hank, we did it." And then she walked inside, closing the door gently behind her. The faint hum of engines echoing like a heartbeat that would never stop, because some stories don't end, they just keep driving forward, carried by those who dare to rebuild their destinies. The end.